Hey, I'm Super. I just saw the Snake Eyes Origins movie recently, and since I had not too long ago done an entire video on the Transformers and their history, I thought that I would give G.I. Joe, a real American hero, the same treatment. I will spoil a ton of stuff in this. If you don't really want to know those things about this, this is the warning. Specifically, I'm more talking about spoilers of the Snake Eyes Origins movie because everything else is at least 8 years old or decades old, so I think I'm pretty safe with that. So G.I. Joe, a real American hero, started out as a toy line by Hasbro in 1982. The original G.I. Joe toy line had started in the 1960s, but it was 12-inch dolls with fabric and you could change out their outfits and stuff. It was like Barbie, but with a lot more guns and ninjas. And I was too young for that line, but I was the absolute perfect age for Real American Hero since I was 6 years old in 1982. Now here's a weird thing that I found out about how this revival lineup started. According to Jim Shooter, who was Marvel's editor-in-chief at the time. Marvel president Jim Galtung was at a charity event where it happened that Hasbro's CEO Steven Hassenfeld was also attending. And both of them happened to go to the restroom at the same time and started talking about their respective businesses while next to each other at the urinals. I don't approve of talking to strangers while you're peeing in a public restroom. Please get away from me, weirdo. No, stop. But what this resulted in was Hasbro guy mentioned they were trying to revamp G.I. Joe for the current action figure market, which was very different than it had been 20 years before. And the Marvel guy says, hey, I've got some of the best creative people in the world working for me, so why don't we hand it to them and see if they can come up with something with your guys? So he got Hasbro in touch with Jim Shooter, who then went to a writer on Marvel's staff, partially due to the fact that he had served in the U.S. Army in Vietnam, and partially because, according to this writer, Larry Hama, because every other Marvel writer had turned it down. And he'd been working on developing a series about Nick Fury forming an elite team called Fury Force to fight Hydra. So they essentially just took that concept that he'd been working on, pulled out the Marvel IP and replaced it with G.I. Joe fighting against this new creation that it was come up with by another Marvel writer, Archie Goodwin. And that was the terrorist organization called Cobra. And then that started it all. So as with a lot of the characters and plot for Transformers being primarily written by a single Marvel writer, the same thing happened here. Larry Hama created pretty much every character and wrote the initial comic series for nearly every issue of its 155-issue run from 1982 to 1994. One special feature of the toy line that a lot of us loved as kids were these file cards that each figure would have. And they would detail their code name, their real name where applicable, birthplaces, basic rundown of their background and personality, specific specialties they had as soldiers, etc. Almost all of these were also written by Larry Hama and were inspired by files that he'd just made for personal use to keep all of his characters straight while writing the comic books. The figures themselves were a pretty instant hit. The first wave were mostly sort of generic, a lot of reuse of the same molds for arms, legs, bodies, and heads, and just had some variations in the paint jobs, except for a couple of specific exceptions, which was like Scarlet was the only girl character in it, and the original Snake Eyes figure was all black with no paint at all on the entire figure because it made it cheaper to produce. And that was how that started, and then a badass icon was accidentally born because they were trying to make cheap toys. They also had more articulation in the elbows and knees than their biggest direct competitor at the time, which was Kenner's Star Wars line, which they didn't have that at all. The Kenner Star Wars line, you could move the arms and legs up and down, but that was it. And they were just fixed in a straight position. And as great as the Star Wars toys were back then, I had a bunch of them, any that I could get my hands on. It was a bit of a drawback in posability. The Joe figures could also swivel at the waist, and the joints on the limbs were ball and socket, so again, it was like more posable. You could, you know, do that. I'm over demonstrating this, whatever. Starting with the second wave of figures that came out and every one that came out after that, they added a new point of articulation where the arms could now swivel back and forth, so that you could like move the arms like this as well as like that. And that added more poses, which was more fun. They also had a fairly large number of vehicle playsets. Some of those were based on real military vehicles like the Sky Striker and the Rattler. And there were some that seemed to be based on some kind of cocaine-fueled fever dream, I think. Like the Cobra Pogo Ballistic Battle Ball, which I'm struggling to understand how it gives any kind of battlefield advantage. The Cobra Septic Tank, which, I mean, does Hasbro know what a septic tank is? What it's for? It holds poop. It's a poop tank. For poop. Also, they had any number of armored vehicles that somehow still made the pilot a sitting duck with no protection. It doesn't really help to have like a tank or a thing with a rocket launcher on it if a sniper can take out the pilot with, no protection for his entire face. As with Transformers, G.I. Joe had a toy line, comic, and animated series. And as with the Transformers, there's a lot of variation in the plots and character connections in the comics and the cartoons. And the general vibe was a little different. The comics tended to be a little bit more adult, and they tackled a lot more serious injuries. There were several characters, like main characters in it, that died throughout the course of the comics. In the cartoons, anytime a vehicle exploded, you would have a very clear animation of everyone jumping out right before it blew up. Or you'd have, a plane explode in the air or something, or a helicopter, and like there would be a very, very obvious animation of a dude in a parachute getting safely going to ground. You didn't really have deaths in the G.I. Joe cartoons, except for one notable almost death in the animated canon, but we will get back to that in a minute. The comic also had a very clear relationship between Scarlet and Snake Eyes. The cartoon never really said it out loud, but I always got the impression in the cartoons that Scarlet was dating Duke. And I don't know if that's a thing that they intended or if that's a thing that I built in my head, because I can't find anything online about it to indicate that that was the case. And when I've gone and rewatched some of those cartoons, I'm like, I guess they never really talk about that, but it seems like they are. I don't know. It's also kind of interesting to note that Snake Eyes in the cartoons wasn't featured very heavily. He was not involved in a lot of major plots, and if he was just kind of like a character who was there, but didn't usually have a big impact on the plots. There was not a lot of personal plot for that character, but the comic books had a ton of it. And the toy line, of course, the Snake Eyes and Storm Shadow figures, and then the various other versions of those figures over the years were some of the coolest things in the entire line, and the things that I was always on the hunt for if a new one came out. The cartoon was pretty fun, and it was where I started with the franchise, partially because a TV show is free to watch on broadcast back then, but toys cost money. It was definitely kind of goofy in places. There's an episode that starts with the G.I. Joe base getting a phone call that says, "The Viper is coming." And so they spend this entire half hour of TV in a panic trying to prepare for this Cobra agent who's coming to spell certain doom for everyone. And then the episode ends with a dude showing up to clean the windows on the base and says, "I'm the Viper. I'm here to wipe windows." The entire episode exists for that joke. Somebody heard that joke, went, "Vipers, Cobra, we can use that as an entire episode plot. So, yeah." And then they did that. And, I mean, it's pretty funny. It's among other people I've known who watched the cartoons as kids. We all, talk about that episode, and we're like, yeah, that was pretty funny. But then sometimes the cartoon would get dark, too. There's an episode of it, a 2-episode actually arc, where there's usually a zany Navy guy shipwreck who's basically Jack Nicholson in an embarrassing sailor suit, He gets kidnapped and brainwashed by Cobra to think that he's not on the team anymore. He lives in the suburbs. He has a wife and kids and a white picket fence, etc. But they're doing all of this so that they can try to secretly extract information from him about G.I. Joe. And then when he realizes what's going on, his family are revealed to be something called synthoids, which slowly dissolve into grayish goo. So he watches the family he's always wanted just dissolve away from him. It's dark. Like, it was deeply disturbing to see as a kid. But it was like a pretty great thing for a show that was as silly as it usually was. And it's another one that when I talk to other friends of mine who grew up with this show, they always like point that one out as like, that was like a great episode. It kind of like had some range to it, but it was a very, very strange, silly show. The cartoon was doing well, as was Transformers, and so Hasbro started preparing to make Transformers the movie, and they also started working at the same time on G.I. Joe the movie. And they planned both of them as theatrical releases. They were both written by the same guy. G.I. Joe was initially supposed to be released first, but they had some production delays, so it put them on the back burner while they finished Transformers. And G.I. Joe the movie is very weird. Like, the Transformers the movie is kind of weird. Like, it has a lot of stuff that's just, if you think about it too much, it doesn't really make sense, and it's kind of strange. But G.I. Joe the movie is just, like, off-the-wall weird. It doesn't take the same tactic that the Transformers movie did with killing off all its old characters to introduce new toys, but Hasbro had been doing different things with the Real American Hero toy line than they did with Transformers. Mostly that they would release just new versions of existing characters for that all the time that were repaints or redesigns with different accessories. And we'd buy them all because, of course, we needed a new Snake Eyes figure that had a pet wolf and a Cobra Commander with the hood in addition to one with a helmet. Of course, we needed those. Obviously. Since they didn't have to create new transforming gimmicks for these sort of things, it was easier to just slap a different coat of paint on an already existing plastic mold. Or create a slightly altered plastic mold and put in a new gun. Easy. New toy. $3 please. Yep. These were like $3 when I was a kid. I am old. So while the movie does introduce new characters, they didn't feel a need to kill off anyone, mostly because they knew we were all going to buy this new wave of figures regardless, and they were mostly at a pretty cheap price point. Except for Duke, who they planned to kill in G.I. Joe the movie, but they changed their minds at the last minute before release, and they added a quick line of recorded dialogue or two to cover that. As I talked about in my Transformers video, audiences did not react well to the death of Optimus Prime, and the movie bombed hardcore in theaters. So Hasbro started rethinking plans they had for G.I. Joe where they'd kill off Duke, the leader of the team. Weird side note, it's funny that as a kid I never noticed that Duke and Optimus Prime are both so heavily coded to be basically John Wayne, except as a military guy or a robot. They had made the decision to not kill Duke after G.I. Joe was mostly basically finished. So they added this quick off-screen lines to let us know that Duke was definitely not dead, even though he looked like he was definitely dead in the animation.
Yo, Joe. He's gone into a coma.
We got better.
Since the cartoon had already been halfway to science fiction anyway by 1987, especially with the introduction of Serpentor, a character created from the DNA of several of history's most ruthless dictators, and the reason I knew what DNA stood for when I was 11, which I digress, I'm rambling, they go full-on weird within the first 15 minutes of this movie and just keep going. So they introduced the idea of this ancient underground alien snake cult called Cobra La. It's supposed to be essentially a take on Shangri-La, and it was initially a stand-in gag name in the script from the writers that they were going to change once they thought of something better. But then Hasbro heard Cobra La and they loved it and insisted that they just keep that name. So Cobra La has this plan to steal a MacGuffin called the Broadcast Energy Transmitter from G.I. Joe and use it to explode a bunch of mutating plant spores all over Earth and destroy humanity so Cobra La can take over. And they reveal also in this movie that Cobra Commander is actually one of these ancient snake people and isn't even human, but was a scientist, snake person, alien, sent into the overworld to prepare humanity for Cobra La's takeover. Which is deeply different from the comic where Cobra Commander starts out as a used car salesman whose life is changed when his brother is killed in a car accident. He becomes obsessed with reforming society and his own image and starts conning people with pyramid schemes, which eventually lead to the formation of Cobra in the first place. Back to this movie, though, Cobra Commander ends up being punished for failing Cobra La and gets hit with spores that further mutate him into just a full-on snake over the course of the film. And he ends up helping Roadblock, who has been accidentally blinded during a fight. And the whole time, Cobra Commander keeps saying, "I was a man once. I was once a man." Except according to this film, he was never a man. He was an alien snake dude all along. There's a sequence of scenes in the movie where a character named Beachhead, who is in charge of training new recruits, gets very frustrated that all the new guys are doing a really great job of passing his tests, but in unconventional ways he wasn't expecting. Which seems counterintuitive for a team that has historically, throughout the series, encouraged out-of-the-box thinking and individuality. Like, they don't even have uniforms that everybody has to comply with. Which in itself is kind of odd and not realistic for a military force, but that's a whole other topic. This is a toy cartoon. They also introduced Lieutenant Falcon, who is Duke's younger brother and voiced by Don Johnson for some reason, but this was at the height of Miami Vice, so it kind of makes sense. Falcon is pretty much totally incompetent. He is a complete waste of space. He's intended to be the hot rod of this movie, like how Hot Rod was in Transformers. As the new guy who, like, kind of takes charge and takes over when Duke dies, but Duke doesn't die in this, so it's pointless. He's introduced into this story by showing him letting this random chick into the base to impress her, who then turns out to have been a Cobra/Dreadnought spy. There's also a scene that they initially had planned for this movie where they were going to show her partially naked, and then they realized that that was a thing that was absolutely not going to fly, so they just painted a bathing suit onto her for the scene. Whatever, it's weird. It should never have been something that they wanted to do for a children's cartoon in the first place, but whatever. Anyway, then Falcon has a scene right after where he slaps a woman recruit on the ass and then asks if he can kiss it and make it better, which also shouldn't have been in a children's cartoon. That was fun. I don't know if I'll keep that in or not. He then abandons guard duty that has been ordered to go on, which allows Serpentor to escape and gets 3 of his teammates badly injured. He also, when he gets scolded about this by Duke, he says he's going to pull rank on Duke, who is his superior officer. So he doesn't even know how a chain of command works. He probably shouldn't be in the military. I don't know how he got the rank of lieutenant. It's very perplexing. Falcon then gets sent off to what amounts to G.I. Joe Reform School, and that's all so they can introduce Sergeant Slaughter, voiced by wrestling star at the time, Sergeant Slaughter. They go on an adventure there, like a side thing that isn't really much worth talking about. Mostly it exists to show us that Falcon kind of sucks and has a lot to learn. I don't know that he ever really actually learns anything in the course of this, but whatever. When we get to the final battle of the movie, Falcon defeats Serpentor by getting his cape caught in the engine intake on his weird Golden Throne flying scooter. I know it has a name. I'm not looking it up. Serpentor was a goofy, shitty concept to begin with and very annoying and a signal of when this version of the franchise jumped the shark, so he doesn't deserve the effort. This I command. Then the Joes fight Globulus, who is the leader of Cobra La, a man with a really long snake body and a human torso and one eye. He gets stabbed in his good eye, They stop the spores from exploding and destroying humanity. They all party as they get word in another off-screen line that Duke is recovering and he's gonna be fine. And now, I know some of you are saying during all of this, where is Poochie? I mean, Snake Eyes. Well, he's certainly in some scenes, but he doesn't really exist as more than background as he does for most of the cartoons. I don't even know if they use his name in this entire movie. I'd need to go back and rewatch it, and I don't feel like it. This movie really needed more Snake Eyes and Storm Shadow and less weird alien snake cults. But as we see later on, sometimes more Snake Eyes and Storm Shadow doesn't necessarily mean it's a good thing. The animation in this is a definite downgrade from the anime-ish graphics of Transformers, and the soundtrack doesn't include any fun 80s power metal, just seemingly recycled music from the TV show, except for the opening number, which is new and includes this. And what is this even, like, crotch cam, crotch cam, crotch cam, crotch cam? I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Moving on, the toy line, the cartoon, and eventually the comics started to decline somewhere around this point, and by the end of 1994, they were all canceled. Other toy lines have come and gone, as well as cartoons and comics. Some of them have tried to reboot things, some have been meant as a continuation of the 82 line, but it's never really been quite the same. In 2009, there was a release of a live-action film revival directed by Stephen Sommers, who had also made the Brendan Fraser starring Mummy movies, which I like a lot, but this, it stars Channing Tatum as Duke, and I honestly don't have much to say about the movie, because it's not very good. It's also not terrible. I just think that it's kind of forgettable. 4 years after that, they did a sequel to that, starring Dwayne Johnson as Roadblock, where Channing Tatum returns as Duke and then gets killed like 10 or 20 minutes into the movie. And the rest of the movie is about getting revenge for the Joes that have all been killed. The movie leans heavily on the origin of Snake Eyes from the 80s comic series, with a few changes and some details omitted. Like it has Snake Eyes and Storm Shadow meeting as children, and Snake Eyes now has taken a vow of silence, while in the comic story, he's unable to speak and facially disfigured. And it's not bad. It's better than the first attempt at live action, but it's still not a great movie. But it has more ninja action, which is usually good. Johnson is pretty charming and fun, as he usually is. And they've dropped the cartoon quirk where Roadblock says everything in rhyme, like he's doing a freestyle rap all the time or something. That works for a cartoon, but not for live action, so that was probably a wise choice. So now, because I'm going to talk about the Snake Eyes Origins movie, but for context, I want to give you a quick version of the comic origin of Snake Eyes. Snake Eyes. It's like a Gralvatron all over again. Anyway, Snake Eyes is a Vietnam veteran, and he had served in a long-range recon patrol team with Tommy, who later becomes Storm Shadow, and another guy who ends up on the Joe team in the comics and cartoon named Stalker. And they are all like best buddies when they're in Vietnam. At one point, Storm Shadow saves Snake Eyes' life during the war. They are close friends, all of them. On the day Snake Eyes is sent home from Vietnam, he's waiting at the airport and his family never arrives. And instead, he's approached by a man called Hawk.
I'm Hawk. Saturday, January 28th.
No, not that one. Anyway, he tells Snake Eyes that his parents and sister have been killed in a car accident, and that his entire family is dead. It turns out later that this was the same car accident that killed Cobra Commander's brother. Weird coincidence, but it's a comic book, whatever. Snake Eyes goes to Japan to see his friend Tommy and try to figure out what he wants to do with the rest of his life. He's just been through a horrifying war experience, and he's lost his entire family. So Tommy, who he is very tight with, has an uncle who is called the Hardmaster, and he leads their ninja clan. Tommy essentially brings him into the family, and he starts to train with them as a ninja. So the Hardmaster has this specific technique that's established where he can mimic the vital signs of any other person. Like, he can mimic their heartbeat specifically, which I'm not sure if that's even a thing in real life, but it features heavily in this story and in an awful lot of issues of Daredevil, where it's like, oh, he can tell who someone is just from their heartbeat or from their scent or whatever. Anyway, he can mimic vital signs. Snake Eyes eventually is so good at ninja things that the Hardmaster offers to make him the future head of their ninja clan instead of Tommy. And Tommy is very angry about this, and then the Hardmaster is assassinated with one of Tommy's arrows, and everyone sees Tommy running away from the compound right after, so they conclude that he must have killed his uncle in a fit of anger and jealousy. However, it turns out that what actually happened is that Cobra Commander hired an assassin named Zartan to kill Snake Eyes, as some kind of twisted revenge for the death of his brother, even though Snake Eyes had no part in that. But Cobra Commander was not really like doing right and was kind of off the rails. But the problem was the Hardmaster was at the exact time that Zartan was going there to find Snake Eyes and kill him, practicing his mimicry of Snake Eyes' vital signs. Zartan was using some kind of, scanning thing that detected his heart beating, was like, oh yeah, it's totally him. I don't think that's real technology, but it's a comic book. But Zartan ended up killing the wrong person. But the point there was that he was going to do that and then frame Tommy for it, because they didn't even know who Tommy was and it didn't matter. They just didn't want it tracked back to them. Tommy happened to witness this but didn't see who had done it. He just saw a figure in the dark. So he ran off because he was trying to track down the man who murdered his uncle and chase him down. Tommy then became Storm Shadow and joined Cobra to secretly find out who killed his uncle and why. Meanwhile, Snake Eyes joined G.I. Joe, and on one of his first missions, there's this helicopter accident. Scarlet is trapped in the wreckage, and he saves her, but in the process, there's a window that explodes directly into his face, which ruins his vocal cords and horribly scars him for life. He and Scarlet end up in a relationship, almost get married a few times, etc. Eventually, Snake Eyes helps Storm Shadow find out that Zartan killed his uncle. Their entire friendship gets patched up. Storm Shadow joins G.I. Joe because he was never really loyal to Cobra in the first place, and now he wants to join his, essentially what he considers, I think, his sword brother, and they join up. And yeah, it's a weird, long, convoluted comic story with more than a few coincidences that are a little bit too close, but it's a comic book. And I think it's an interesting, tragic tale of how one terrible accident intersects and hurts so many different people. Tommy and Snake Eyes are ultimately both good guys in that story who have been dealt an awful hand by situations out of their control, and ultimately they both find a way to triumph over that. So I mention all of that because Snake Eyes G.I. Joe Origins is a hot mess. In this movie, Snake Eyes is never scarred, never silent. He only puts on the trademark mask look of his character in like the final shot of the movie. They pretty much took everything cool about Snake Eyes and said, we don't need that. He has no military career in this film. There's a prologue where his father gets murdered while he's a child, and then it goes straight from that to him as an adult doing illegal cage fights. He gets approached by a guy from the Yakuza who says he can help him find the man who murdered his father if he works for him. So Snake Eyes starts working for him. Then he double crosses him and helps rescue a guy who had betrayed the Yakuza, who turns out to be Tommy. In this version, he didn't know Tommy prior to this at all. They'd never met. But Tommy still is like, hey, I'll take you in and vouch for you with my family. So now he's training to be a ninja in this too. But with no real relationship, no reason that Tommy should trust him. It's kind of weird. Then they go through a whole thing where there's these 3 trials he needs to go through to join their ninja clan.
You'll have to go through the 3 trials.
What 3 trials are those?
Then at some point in this, it's revealed that Snake Eyes actually is working for the Yakuza still, and they staged rescuing Tommy to gain his trust so that he can betray them to the Yakuza and steal a magical item called the Jewel of the Sun, and in return they're going to give him the man who murdered his father. Snake Eyes goes through the first 2 trials, but the third involves this giant snake that can sense when someone is pure of heart or not, and Snake Eyes definitely is not, because he is a big giant liar and a betrayer of his friends. So he ultimately fails that third trial, and he's expelled from the compound. He then breaks back into the compound to steal the Jewel of the Sun, which honestly isn't even that well guarded. Like, literally the doors are not locked. The doors are not locked to get into the room where the jewel is. Like, they might as well have just handed it to him. It was weird. So he succeeds in this theft. He hands it off to the Yakuza. They let him know that they're stealing it for a new organization called Cobra and working with the Baroness, played by an actress wearing what may be the worst wig I've ever seen in my life. The Yakuza guys all leave to go to Tommy's compound and kill everyone, and pretty much tell him they're going to do that. After all of this stuff, finally confronting his father's killer, who has spilled that he works for Cobra, Snake Eyes finally has second thoughts about everything that he's done for the last 90 minutes of this movie and goes to save Tommy and his family. Scarlett shows up at this point with minimal explanation of why she's there, something G.I. Joe. The Yakuza decides to double-cross Cobra, so the Baroness joins up with the good guys for about 10 minutes before she just leaves because she didn't sign up for this shit. They fight Yakuza guy, Tony gets the jewel back from him, and in a moment of anger tries to kill him with it. Yakuza guy almost escapes, but Snake Eyes traps him in the giant snake pit, and the snake senses the Yakuza guy is evil and kills him. Their anaconda don't want none unless you're pure of heart, son. I'm so sorry. I'm awful. It's awful. I'm sorry. But once the joke goes in like that, it stays in. Anyway, the Ninja Clan then decides that Snake Eyes is totally pure of heart now because he chose not to get revenge for his father's murder after all. But Tommy is told he is no longer fit to lead the clan because he tried to use the magic jewel to kill a dude who was trying to murder his entire family. So he runs off in anger and joins Cobra, saying he's no longer going to be known by his birth name, but will now be Storm Shadow. And by the way, this is more than a bit weird because Tommy's given last name is Japanese for Storm Shadow. So it's kind of like me popping into a room and saying, we will no longer refer to cheese as cheese. From now on, we shall call it fromage. It's the same thing in a different language. What is happening right now? Why? Scarlett then lets Snake Eyes know that his father was actually a G.I. Joe agent and that's why he was killed, so Snake Eyes joins the team, finally wears the iconic mask that they showed already in every trailer, but is only in the movie for this one shot. So like, I had really hoped to like this movie, I truly did, but it's just a mess. Snake Eyes is ultimately a backstabbing villain until the last act of the movie. Storm Shadow is no longer a guy who joins the bad guys to ultimately get justice for his family while being framed for murder. He's just mad that he's not going to get to lead the clan when his uncle dies and swears to kill Snake Eyes for it. And by the way, he's kind of justified in his anger at Snake Eyes in this. I have more sympathy in this situation than I do for Snake Eyes, who cannot be trusted at all. Snake Eyes isn't disfigured, he can talk. I thought at least at the end they'd have some line where he was like, I've betrayed the clan and I've done terrible things in the course of all this, so I will vow that I will not speak until I've fully made it right. Something. Anything. I was just really let down to see them throw out so much of the existing story that worked. They could have easily had a subplot where Snake Eyes accidentally caused an accident years ago and has a hit put out on him. Tommy still could get framed for murder. It really wouldn't have been that hard to fit any of that in. Maybe have an accident at the end of Act 2 or during Act 3 that results in Snake Eyes' scars and inability to speak. This just felt like they decided to make a few small changes to update the character and then just said, well, we changed that, but why not change everything else? What's stopping us? And this movie was originally supposed to be released in March of 2020, and then the Pan Pizza happened, and it kept getting pushed back again and again and again until it was finally put out in July of 2021. So they had over a year to rethink and fix things, but they just put this out being like this. Like, how do you do a movie with the word origins in the title and then not give us any explanation of the iconic trademarks of the character we know? That's almost worse than the Han Solo prequel that over-explained every aspect of his character even though nobody fucking asked. It was just unnecessary. When you go into a reboot of something with decades of history and an established story, and a giant fan base already built in, it's important to go in knowing where to draw the line on making too many changes from the source, and knowing is half the battle. So the video's over. I'm gonna go edit it and put it up. If you hate or love my opinions or feel like I forgot something or whatever, leave a comment or like and subscribe to this channel and I'll do more nerd ranting. Anyway, thanks for coming to my meltdown.